My name is Nicole Ward, 34 years old. For most of my adult life, I've lived by a code, discipline, precision, loyalty. The Army taught me that. It also taught me that trust is a luxury, not a guarantee. I forgot that lesson when I married Charles. We'd been together for 4 years. Charles was charming in that quiet, persuasive way. He wasn't ambitious, but he was attentive. Funny when he wanted to be, and for a long time he made me believe that stability meant safety. Our marriage wasn't perfect, but whose is? He said he admired my strength. In truth, I think it intimidated him. Lately, home had felt like a cold barrack. Tidy quiet, stripped of warmth. Charles complained about living near base housing, about my long hours, about how a woman like me shouldn't have to live in such a rigid routine. He wanted dinners out, better clothes, and a life that didn't revolve around deployment schedules. I told myself it was just stress. My next overseas assignment was 3 weeks away, a 9-month rotation I was both dreading and counting down to. I thought it would be our last before I finally left service. I planned to open a small logistics firm after retirement to build something real, for both of us. Then one evening, everything changed. It was late. I came home early from training parking by the back fence so he wouldn't hear. I remember the air was still warm, thick with the smell of dry grass and wine. Charles was on the patio talking on the phone. His voice was low, but something in the tone froze me mid-step. I recognized it, the conspiratorial whisper people use when they know they're doing something wrong. "Dad, it's just 3 more weeks," he said, swirling a glass. "When she's wheels up, it's done. She left me access to everything. The savings, the joint accounts. I'll transfer the funds and file right after. She won't even know until she's halfway across the ocean." Silence. My pulse slowed to nothing. "She owes me this," Charles continued. "I've put up with years of her military nonsense, always gone, always in control. Dad, it's what I deserve." That word deserve cut deeper than any betrayal could. He wasn't talking about shared money. He meant my savings, $162, $400. Every cent earned over a decade of deployments, combat bonuses, and sleepless nights spent leading men twice my size through sandstorms and mortar fire. Money I'd kept to build our future. Money I foolishly made accessible to him, thinking trust meant transparency. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just watched the back of his head, his shoulders relaxed, unaware he was casually dismantling my life over speakerphone. His father Richard murmured something about timing and not making it obvious. Charles laughed softly. That sound will haunt me for years. When the call ended, he went inside. I stood there for a long time under the porch light, numb. Not angry, not broken, just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes right before a storm. Inside, I moved like a ghost. I saw the half-empty wine bottle, the open laptop with travel tabs still on the screen. My photo as his wallpaper, ironic considering he was planning to erase me. In that moment, I made a decision not out of vengeance, but survival. I whispered to the empty kitchen, "You want my life's work? You'll get what's left of it when I'm done." That night, I didn't cry. I didn't confront him. I didn't pack. I just lay beside him in bed, listening to his steady breathing, and something in me turned to steel. He thought I was the soldier he could outsmart, but he had no idea what a woman trained for war could do when the battle was personal. The next morning, I woke before dawn as always. Charles was still asleep beside me, peaceful, unaware. The pale blue light crept through the blinds and brushed across his face, soft and ordinary. I studied him the way I'd once studied terrain before a mission, calm surface, hidden danger. He'd chosen his battleground. Now I would choose mine. I left quietly, closing the door with care. The base was only 15 minutes away, but I didn't drive there. Instead, I headed toward the small credit union across town, one he'd never heard of. The clerk greeted me with the polite boredom of someone who thought this was just another morning deposit. She didn't know she was helping me build an escape. Within an hour, I had opened 2 new accounts under my name, only a checking account for day-to-day use and a high-yield savings account for my nest egg, my real nest egg. I used my parents' address as the mailing contact. Every document, every password, every detail was airtight. Then I drove to our usual bank, the one Charles loved to monitor like a hawk pretending to be a dove. The manager smiled when she saw me. "Morning, Captain Ward. Preparing for deployment." "Yes," I said evenly, "and I'd like to make a few adjustments before I go." I wired $162,000 to the new account. I left exactly $500 in the old savings and a few hundred in checking, enough to keep him calm for a moment, not enough to survive. Then I closed his debit card, citing it as lost, and requested a replacement sent to my parents' home. When I walked out of the branch, I didn't feel victorious, just clear. People think betrayal feels like rage, but that's not true. It feels like clarity, cold surgical clarity. My next stop was JAG, the legal office on base. I spent nearly 2 hours explaining the situation to a young captain who looked like he'd just stepped out of law school. He was sympathetic, careful, and methodical. He confirmed what I already knew: my savings were legally mine as long as I could prove the account existed before marriage, and I could. He also warned me that if Charles discovered the transfer, he might try to retaliate. Be ready, he said. Emotionally, legally, everything. I gave a small nod. Always am. By noon, I was at my last destination, the career counselor's office. Captain Ward, Master Sergeant Reyes said, raising an eyebrow. Didn't you say you were separating this year? I changed my mind, I replied. I'd like to re-enlist. He blinked. You sure you've been planning your exit for 2 years? I'm sure. My voice didn't waver. 5 more years. Preferably an unaccompanied tour somewhere far from here. Within an hour, I'd signed a new contract, a 5-year extension, a slot at an advanced logistics training school, and orders that would take me across the country after this deployment. I looked at the paper and felt a strange peace. It wasn't what I'd planned, but it was what I needed. Freedom didn't always come from leaving. Sometimes it came from staying, but on your own terms. When I got home that evening, I slipped seamlessly back into my role. Dinner was waiting. The lights were soft. I laughed at his jokes, asked about his day, and even suggested a weekend trip before my deployment. Charles smiled, his first real smile in weeks. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. See? We're getting back to us. I smiled back. Of course we are. Inside, I was calculating the countdown. 14 days until departure. 14 days until he learned what it felt like to lose something you thought you owned. That night, he rested his head in my lap while we watched TV. I stroked his hair, practiced the performance of tenderness. It was strange how easy it was to pretend love while preparing for war. Later in the bathroom mirror, I practiced smiling. Not the real one, not the soft one from before. The one I'd need for the next 2 weeks, the one that hid everything. Looking at my reflection, I whispered, You think I'm your obedient soldier. You'll learn soon enough I outrank you in every way that matters. The clock ticked. 2 weeks. That was all it would take. The morning of my so-called deployment arrived warm and windless, the kind of day that would normally make me ache for freedom. Charles hovered near the door, pretending to help with my duffel, but mostly fussing about trivial things. Did you pack the sunscreen I bought, the one with the high SPF? He asked, frowning at my bag. I did. I lied. I'd left it on purpose. Let him think I still needed him for something. He walked me to the driveway, kissed my cheek, and smiled, like the perfect husband sending his wife off to serve. I memorized the look not out of sentiment, but because I wanted to remember what false love looked like when it believed it had already won. I'll handle the bills, he said confidently. Don't worry about a thing. Just come back safe, okay? I smiled, soft and sincere looking. You're in charge now. And then I drove away. But I didn't drive to the airfield. My orders had been delayed by 48 hours due to a scheduling change. Officially, I was awaiting transport in a temporary barracks on the other side of base. In reality, I was in a small, undecorated room, watching the sunlight crawl across white walls, waiting for the clock to strike 10:00 a.m. That was when his world would start to crack. At exactly 10:03, the first text came. Charles, hey, weird thing. Bank app says I can't log in. Can you reset the password? I ignored it. 10 minutes later, another buzz. Charles, the debit card isn't working. Gas station says it's declined. Did you move the money? I smiled, quietly. An hour later, Charles Nicole answered me. I'm at the bank. They said I'm not on the account anymore. Where's the money? There was over $160,000 in savings. Where is it? I let him sweat. I wanted him to feel the same helpless confusion he'd planned for me, the same chill of realizing you are suddenly powerless. Finally, at 11:30, I replied, Me, which money, Charles? The money you were going to steal from me. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Charles, what? I don't know what you're talking about. Me, I heard you. 2 weeks ago, on the patio, you and your father. You said you'd wait until I was deployed. You called it the nest egg. Long pause. Charles, you misunderstood. You were eavesdropping. That's insane. I would never. Me, my security camera records audio. And I'm sure a judge will love to hear how you deserve my savings. The typing bubble vanished. Then came a series of calls. I didn't answer. I could imagine him pacing, sweating, realizing the script had flipped. When I finally texted again, it was simple. Me, I'm not overseas, Charles. I'm still on base, and I'm not leaving anytime soon. Another pause. Charles, you're lying. You hate this job. You wouldn't re-enlist. Me, I just signed a 5-year contract. Consider it an extended vacation from you. Silence. For the first time since I'd discovered his plan, I allowed myself to feel something, not joy, not triumph, but stillness. It was the kind of calm that comes after months of storm. I turned off my phone, lay back on the stiff barracks mattress, and closed my eyes. Somewhere across town, he was screaming. I couldn't hear it, but I could feel it. It was the sound of his plan collapsing in real time. He had wanted freedom from me, from the life I'd built. Now he had it, just not in the way he'd imagined. 3 days passed in uneasy silence. I had assumed Charles would retreat, lick his wounds, and plan his next move quietly. I should have known better. When a man like him loses control, he doesn't reflect, he retaliates. It began with a call from my commanding officer. "Captain Ward," he said through the phone, his tone clipped. "Report to my office immediately." When I entered my CO, a tired-looking major with deep lines across his forehead was sitting at his desk. Beside him stood First Sergeant Morales, arms crossed, face unreadable. I felt the weight of their eyes before either spoke. The major leaned forward. "Your husband contacted us." I stayed perfectly still. "Sir, he claims you've abandoned him," the major said flatly. "He also alleges financial abuse, withholding marital funds, and mental instability. He said you're unfit for duty and might be a danger to yourself and others." For a moment, I couldn't even hear the hum of the air conditioner. There it was, his counterstrike. A move meant to destroy my credibility, my career, everything I'd worked for. I forced myself to breathe evenly. "Sir, those accusations are false." "Can you prove that?" the major asked. "Because right now, it's his word against yours." I met his eyes. "Yes, sir, I can." I took out my phone, already prepared for this moment. I had the recording saved, backed up once to a cloud drive, once on a flash drive in my jacket pocket. "This," I said, placing the phone on his desk, "was recorded 2 weeks ago on my home security system." I hit play. Charles's voice filled the small office. "She's leaving in 3 weeks. When she's gone, I'll empty the savings file for divorce and move out. She owes me this, Dad, for making me live like this." For a long moment, no one spoke. The major's jaw tightened. The first sergeant's expression hardened from neutrality to disgust. When the clip ended, I stopped the recording and slipped the phone back into my pocket. The silence that followed was louder than any explosion I'd ever heard. Finally, the major spoke quietly. "He told you were unstable after this." "Yes, sir." The first sergeant let out a low whistle. "He set you up and then cried abuse when it backfired." Classic. The major's voice lost its sharp edge. "You did the right thing protecting yourself. We'll handle the rest." He turned to Morales. "Get base security on the line. Her husband is to be trespassed from this facility, effective immediately. Any further contact goes through JAG or her attorney." "Roger that, sir." I nodded, but inside something cracked, a strange mix of vindication and grief. They dismissed me, but before I reached the door, the major said softly, "Ward." "Yes, sir. You did everything by the book. Don't let this man make you feel otherwise." I managed a tight nod and walked out. The bright afternoon sunlight hit me like a punch. I stood outside the office building, breathing in the hot air, my uniform clinging to my back. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a hollow ache. That night, my phone buzzed again, this time with messages from an unknown number. "Charles, you told your command. They're threatening to arrest me if I go near the base. You did this, Charles. My father's furious. We're going to see a lawyer. You can't just take everything. I'm getting half. Charles. You psycho. I loved you, and you ruined my life." I stared at the words for a long moment. Then I deleted them one by one. He wanted to provoke me, pull me into a fight. But I had already won the only battle that mattered: credibility. Later, I called my lawyer, Ms. Vargas, and forwarded everything. Her voice was calm, confident, sharp as glass. "Let him file," she said. "I'll take care of the rest." When I hung up, I sat on the edge of my bed in the small, sterile barracks room, watching the reflection of the city lights on the window. The world outside was quiet. Inside me, something had gone still. He thought he could define me with lies, but the truth, documented, recorded, undeniable, was now my armor. For the first time in weeks, I slept through the night. 9 months later, I sat in a courthouse 2 states away from where my marriage had once existed. The walls smelled faintly of disinfectant and fear. Two things I had long since learned to live with. Across the aisle sat Charles. He looked smaller somehow. The expensive suit couldn't hide the hollow under his eyes, or the faint tremor in his hand as he whispered to his father, Richard. They were flanked by a lawyer who looked too polished to understand the kind of ruin that comes from arrogance. My attorney, Ms. Vargas, sat beside me. Her hair was neat, her tone steady. If justice had a heartbeat, it would sound like her voice. Remember, she said softly, you don't need to speak unless the judge asks. We'll let the evidence do the talking. The session began with formalities, but the tension was palpable. Charles's lawyer stood buttoned his jacket and launched into his opening statement. My client, Mr. Charles Ward, was financially and emotionally abused by his wife. Captain Nicole Ward's career and income overshadowed him. She deprived him of marital funds and abandoned him without warning, leaving him destitute. I stared straight ahead. Lies often sounded polished when dressed in courtroom language. Then came Vargas's turn. She stood calmly, no theatrics, no raised voice. Your Honor, what my client protected was not marital property but her own life savings, funds accrued long before this marriage, and targeted for theft by the man sitting across from her. The judge raised an eyebrow. You have proof of this alleged theft plan. Vargas smiled faintly. Yes, Your Honor. She pressed play. The audio clip filled the courtroom. Charles's voice confident and careless. When she's gone, I'll empty the savings file and move out. She owes me this, Dad. It was followed by Richard's approving hum, that quiet confirmation of a father enabling his son's greed. The silence afterward was thunderous. Charles's lawyer froze mid-note. Richard turned pale. Charles's jaw tightened, and for a second his composure cracked. The judge leaned back, eyes narrowing. This is your client's voice. Vargas didn't need to answer. Everyone in that room already knew. The rest was just aftermath. Vargas produced 10 years of bank records deposits from deployments, bonuses, re-enlistment incentives. Every figure aligned perfectly with my story. Charles's lawyer tried to argue intent that I had gifted him access by placing his name on the account. Vargas didn't even blink. Intent matters, Your Honor. Her intent was trust. His was theft. Only one is a crime. The courtroom murmured. By the time it ended, the ruling was clear. The $162,400 was solely my property. Charles's spousal support request was denied. His claims of emotional distress were dismissed. All that remained was the division of basic assets, an old SUV, the household furniture, and a few thousand in a shared checking account. I told Vargas let him have them, all of it. She turned to me surprised. Are you sure? I don't want anything that carries his fingerprints, I said quietly. I just want closure. In the end, Charles left the courthouse with a stack of papers granting him everything meaningless and none of what he wanted most. He'd gained the furniture, the car, and the satisfaction of thinking he'd won something. But as Vargas and I walked into the cold sunlight, she checked her phone and smirked. The bank's already contacted me, she said. He can't qualify to keep the car loan. It'll be repossessed within a month. I didn't smile, I just nodded. Let the world take care of its own symmetry, I said. Vargas chuckled under her breath. You're colder than most people I represent. I met her eyes. No, Ms. Vargas. I'm just done bleeding for people who mistake my kindness for weakness. When I drove away from that courthouse, the city blurred behind me. For the first time in years, I felt something close to freedom. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was peace, the kind earned after surviving a war you never wanted to fight. It has been 10 months since the court hearing. I now live in a quiet apartment overlooking the edge of a coastal town 3,000 miles from where my old life burned itself to ashes. The walls are bare, the night still, and the silence finally feels like a companion instead of a punishment. Sometimes when I pour my morning coffee, I still hear echoes of the woman I used to be, the wife who trusted the soldier, who believed loyalty could hold a marriage together. But those echoes fade faster now. My new assignment is steady administrative work at a logistics command center, no deployments for at least a year. The younger officers salute the paperwork piles up, and I go home to a space that smells of cedar and sea salt instead of betrayal. Charles, on the other hand, never learned silence. I heard through Ms. Vargas that he lost the SUV after 2 months. He'd tried to keep it, but with no steady job and a credit score sinking faster than his pride, the bank reclaimed it from Richard's driveway. The furniture he'd clung to was too expensive to move, and now most of it, Vargas said, is crammed into his father's garage, collecting dust. He wanted comfort, and all he got was clutter. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. One afternoon, a certified letter arrived, no return address, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. Richard's. I hesitated before opening it. Inside was a 4-page handwritten letter that read like an unhinged sermon. He accused me of destroying his son's future, of using military privilege to oppress a decent man, of turning my husband against family and morality. Each sentence pulsed with self-righteous venom. The last page was worse, a hand-drawn invoice itemizing expenses. Room and board for Charles, 8 months, $8,000. Groceries and utilities, $2, $400. Emotional distress and damages, $10,000. Total owed, $20, $400. At the bottom in neat blue ink, "This is the least you can do, Captain Ward. Be a woman of honor and pay what you owe." For the first time in months, I laughed. Not a bitter laugh, just quiet disbelief at how small their world had become. I scanned the letter and forwarded it to Ms. Vargas. Her response came 15 minutes later. "On it, I'll handle this." 2 days later, she sent me a copy of her reply to Richard, a cease and desist notice warning him that continued contact would constitute harassment and attempted extortion. But Vargas, in her particular brand of poetic justice, had added one final paragraph. "Since your son defaulted on the SUV loan, the remaining balance of $4,380.77 has been covered by my client. Should you wish to settle all outstanding accounts, Captain Ward will gladly accept payment for this amount. Please advise whether you prefer wire transfer or cashier's check." That was 3 weeks ago. The silence since then has been absolute. Sometimes I imagine Richard reading that letter, face-red hands shaking. Sometimes I imagine Charles still pacing in his father's house, rehearsing justifications for a future that never arrived. But mostly I don't imagine them at all. Because the truth is, I no longer live in reaction to what they did. The woman they betrayed doesn't exist anymore. At night, I walk along the shoreline outside my building, the wind tugging at my hair, the sea stretching wide and indifferent. Freedom doesn't look like I thought it would. It isn't triumphant. It's quiet, earned, untidy. I used to think revenge would taste sweet, but it doesn't. It just tastes clean like air after a storm. I've learned that closure doesn't come from watching others fall. It comes when you stop needing to look back.